With the NHL Draft coming up this weekend, we're going to talk all about that. And the hockey season is officially over. We're going to talk about all of that on this edition of Locked On Anaheim Ducks.
Your Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jason JD Hernandez. I've been covering hockey for over a decade, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So as I mentioned, I've been covering hockey for a while, and I'm also the public address voice for the Coachella Valley Firebirds, whose season is also over. But we're not going to talk about that today. No, we're actually going to talk mostly about the NHL Draft because that is coming up this weekend. We got to switch gears really quickly. The hockey season just ended. The draft is this weekend, and free agency opens up in a few days. So it's going to come very fast and very furiously over the next couple of weeks. So you could expect to see a plethora of episodes come July 1st, really. And the reason for that is because I plan on going to Vegas this weekend. I'll talk more about that in a second, but let's talk about that third pick that the Ducks have. And that third pick is kind of an interesting one because it is expected that Macklin Celebrini is going to be the number one pick. I think everybody expects Macklin to be the number one pick. We all know that. The number two pick, some mock drafts in the last few days have switched from Demidov going to the Blackhawks to Artyom Levshunov going to the Blackhawks. And I think mock drafts right now are about 50-50 on whether Chicago is going to take Demidov or take Levshunov. Demidov, of course, is the skilled forward who's currently playing in Russia, and Levshunov, probably the best defenseman in this class playing out of Michigan State University. And in fact, I've got a clip that I'm going to play for you right now. And this is from Hadi Kalikesh from Locked On NHL Prospects talking about the NHL mock draft. The Locked On Network did have a mock draft recently, and I alluded to it last week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just play you the clip right now.
Exactly. Let's move on to third overall here. We've got an interesting selection from the Anaheim Ducks selecting Artyom Levshunov, possibly the prospect that everyone's expecting to go at least in the top three. And I think the Anaheim Ducks really need a right-handed defenseman, a right-handed player overall. And in terms of right-handed Ds, Levshunov's up there with the best. I mean, he's so toolsy. He's the most mobile, rangy defenseman not named Anton Salayev in this draft. I love the ability to close gaps in transition. I love the energy, the effort level, the aggression that he brings. He's got fantastic work ethic. He's a funny guy. He's a great person. Interviews really well. Ticks a lot of boxes for NHL GMs. On top of that, he's got some sneaky offensive skill. I mean, he's got a bomb of a shot. Pretty interesting hands in a pinch. You know, he doesn't really flash stick handling skill all that often, but when he needs to get out of trouble, he can do it. Great passing ability as well. He's a player who does need to kind of shape up his decision making, get a bit more consistent with his reads. But I think the habits are something you can work with, especially offensively. He's always jumping into rushes. He's always kind of beating opponents to open ice on the weak side in transition. There's a bunch of stuff to work with Artyom Levshunov. So I think this is a great selection at third overall. There's a couple defensemen that I prefer personally, just based on what I look for in defensemen, but Levshunov's about as sure a bet for the NHL as you get at this range. And yeah, I understand fully the Anaheim Ducks going for him because the other options in terms of right-handed players, I'd say are probably going to be available around 7, 8, 9, 10. Levshunov's not passing 5, that's for sure.
Thanks to Hadi Kalikesh for that breakdown. As he mentioned, the Ducks do need a right-handed defenseman, and Levshunov is the best righty D-man on this draft. And I'll show you the picture right now. In the mock draft, it is Celebrini, Demidov, Levshunov, 1, 2, 3. But if Levshunov goes second, then I think the Ducks are not going to look to Demidov or even Lindstrom or Iginla, they still need a right-handed defenseman, and they could very well go to Zane Parekh from the Saginaw Spirit, who is another right-handed defenseman. I think this might be a draft where you go after a right-handed defenseman, and these are two of the best righty D-men that we've seen in a couple of years. But I've talked about Lev Shunov on this podcast. I haven't really talked about Zane Parekh a whole lot. He's a 6-foot $180 playing from the Saginaw Spirit. Had a tremendous season in Saginaw, scoring 96 points in 66 games. One of the best passers, actually one of the most gifted offensive defensemen, if not the best offensive defenseman in this draft. Also has amazing vision throughout the ice, probably works best on the power play, but also he's got four-way mobility. He can go from corner to corner and skate with the best of them. As far as transition defense, Zane Parekh, another one of those crafty defensemen, not super rangy, but very dynamic, very compact, and can really get to the transition with a burst of speed, but also has just a sniper of a shot. But what I like the most is the hockey sense, the passing, the vision, the ability to look 2 moves ahead, so to speak. The only knock on his game is he's only a $180, 6 foot. He's got to build that muscle. He's got to build that physicality. He's got to build that physical part of the game, especially as a defenseman. You want him to be strong down low. You want him to block as many shots as possible. And that at least can be not necessarily taught, but that can be worked on. Hockey sense cannot be worked on. Physicality, bulking up, building up muscle, that can always be worked on in the off season. And if Parekh is really serious about upping his physicality, then he can easily put on another 15 to 20 pounds, and he could be a force in the National Hockey League as far as I'm concerned. So I like either one of those picks. It kind of feels like the Ducks have not necessarily an embarrassment of riches, but they have this silver platter, a bunch of silver platters right in front of them, and the world is their oyster. And there's plenty of good picks there. I would pick Parekh over Sam Dickinson personally, and I would even pick him over Silayev, who in this mock draft, by the way, fell all the way to number 13 with the Minnesota Wild. And there are even some mock drafts that are getting Silayev out of the top 10. Look, he's one of the more talented defensemen in this draft, but not worth a third pick. Not when you have Lev Shunov and Parekh right there for the taking. So that's just my opinion on that. Just to round out the rest of the top part of that mock draft, Lindstrom, Iginla, Parekh, Sam Dickinson, Byam, Berkeley Catton from the Flames, Cole Yzerman went to the Devils, then Carter Yakimchuk, Konsta Helenius, Anton Silayev, and Beckett Senecki. So there's some very interesting picks there. Another interesting right-handed defenseman that went 16th fell to the Blues, Adam Juracek. I did not see him go 16, but another talented right-handed defenseman, but not as good as Parekh and Lev Shunov. So those are a couple of names that I'm personally looking at. I just like his game a lot. All right, we're going to head into the first intermission, and we're going to talk all about the Stanley Cup Finals and more draft stuff because this does relate. We will get to that on the other side. And now a brief word from eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. Patience underlined. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Once again, you're locked in with Jason JD Hernandez. So before I get to the Stanley Cup final, I'm just going to spoil in case you're under a rock and tell you exactly what happened. The Edmonton Oilers came back and forced a Game 7. Yeah, that actually happened. And they lost Game 7. Final score was 2-1 in Game 7. I only watched the third period of that game for reasons which I won't bore you with now, but I saw most of the rest of the games, and this was just one of those wacky Stanley Cup finals. Florida just dominated the first 3 games. Then you had goalies getting chased. You had Stuart Skinner getting chased early in this series, and then you had Bobrovsky getting chased later in this series. Edmonton put a whooping on Florida late in that series, and that's when we saw the appearance of former Anaheim Duck Anthony Stolarz. That's right, Stoli, the goalie, got into the game and really did as best a job as he could. So that was something to watch personally, is Stoli just kind of do his best and try to keep Florida somewhat in it, which was fine. But I got to give credit to the Oilers for even forcing a Game 7. And by the way, a couple of really interesting stats. So this was the first time since 2011 where a team forced a Game 7 after being down 0-3 and then eventually losing the series. By the way, 2011 was also the year where both the NHL and the AHL had teams come back from 0-3 to force a Game 7. Hat tip to Jessica Brand on that one, so I'll show that right there. Yeah, first time we had the Blackhawks, Canucks, Red Wings, Sharks, and yeah, who remembers the Houston Aeros back in 2011? I know my buddy Joseph Zakcheski does. So that was a weird and wacky series as well. By the way, all 3 of those series wound up not completing the comeback. Down 0-3, came back to force a Game 7, but they couldn't win that 4th in a row. So neither of those series had a reverse sweep, and that didn't happen this year either. The Cleveland Monsters, they were down 0-3 against the Hershey Bears, came back in Game 4, won Game 5, won Game 6 on the road in Hershey, almost won Game 7 on the road in Hershey. That one ended in overtime, only for the Hershey Bears to win the series in the deciding Game 7. And then this year, the Oilers also lost by 1 goal. So, yeah, none of those series completed the comeback. But I just thought that was an interesting note to keep in mind. And with the Oilers losing the Stanley Cup Finals, I'm going to talk about the draft first and then talk about everything else having to do with the Stanley Cup Finals because the Ducks have a lot to do with this. Let's start with the draft itself. The Ducks maintain their 31st pick. They don't fall further in the draft for the first time in what seems like forever, thank God. They were 21st, 22nd, 23rd. Then they fell to 29, 30. Then they fell to 31st. It was looking like the Ducks were going to fall even further. Fortunately for Ducks fans, that did not happen. But, wow, gosh. Former Ducks. I'll talk about that in a second. But now that the Ducks have pick number 31, what are they going to do with that pick? Let's go back to our mock draft. I had Andrew Basha, left wing for the Medicine Hat Tigers, as a 31st pick. And here we have another clip from Hadi Kalikesh from Locked On NHL Prospects. Take it away.
At 31st overall, now we're going to go with the order in the way it is right now. I mean, it's 3-1 in the series right now for Florida, so we'll assume they're picking last. We might be wrong, but we'll see. The Anaheim Ducks with a pick from the Edmonton Oilers here at the Locked On NHL Mock Draft select Andrew Basha with their 31st pick. He's a left wing, played for the Medicine Hat Tigers this year. I was extremely impressed with his game as the season went on, especially as Cayden Lindstrom was out with injury. Basha took control of that Medicine Hat team and really made a difference for his organization. Last year, he was very much a checking forward, very much your forechecker, kind of speedy buzzsaw type of player who just makes life very difficult for defensemen as they try to break out the puck. Because one of the things I look for in forecheckers is edge work, actually, because your ability to shift on your edges extremely quickly to stay in a defender's face is so important. That's why slower or less kind of agile players tend to struggle on the forecheck. That's Basha's strengths, and that's been the case since last year. But this year, we saw a lot more of what he can do on the puck. He's got these little slip passes that he plays all the time off the boards. Really good at cutting back against pressure and finding a trailer. He's got a whippy shot in motion, which blends really well with his high-end speed. Bash is one of the paciest prospects in the draft as well. Great edge work, great top speed, really powerful as well. There's just so much to love here. I think he should have gone much higher than this, but Anaheim's going to be laughing their way to the bank here, selecting Andrew Basha at 31st overall.
Thank you for that, Hadi. So Andrew Basha is a name that has been lobbied about out there. Another name that I've started to see on some recent mock drafts that could fall to 31 is Teddy Stiga from the developmental program from the USNT. Very small forward, 5'10", $176. Had a great showing at the U18 World Championships this past year. 11 points, 6 goals, 5 assists. He also had just great offense in the developmental program. 36 goals, 43 assists. Also gives 100% effort on both sides of the ice, something that you love to see. Even though the numbers don't show it, he is a fairly solid, pretty solid defensive player. Something that the Ducks could always need, especially on that forward position. Could I see him cracking the Ducks roster? Not right away. I could see him being a very solid depth piece, maybe a fourth line winger down the line. But Teddy Stiga is a player to watch out for. Obviously, Andrew Basha is a player that I've mentioned. Someone else that I've mentioned on this very podcast more than a few times is another just great player that I had dropping down that far, and that would be, he's not going to fall. Stian Solberg. Now we're seeing a lot of mock drafts getting Solberg in the upper 20s, where the Ducks were. So just an observation that I've noticed with his stock rising over the last few days. All right. What we're going to do, we're just going to head into the second break right now. I'm going to talk all about the Stanley Cup final. Brace yourselves, Ducks fans. There's a lot to talk about on this one. Stay locked in. Now, a brief word from the Game Time app. And folks, it's the summer. Major League Baseball is in full swing. I mean, you could check out Angels games for $1 with fees. It's $4 or $5. I mean, yes, it's the Anaheim Angels. I still call them the Anaheim Angels, but you could see them at super low prices thanks to the Game Time app. And you could pick any specific games. You can customize where you want to sit. There's flash deals, zone deals, last minute tickets. You can get tickets in field level for like $22, $23. That is not bad. So, hey, you could find easy to find MLB tickets of every kind of event in your area and views from all seats. So take the guesswork out of buying baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Get those $22 seats for practically free, guys. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Once again, you're locked in with Jason JD Hernandez. And let's talk about the Stanley Cup final and what all went down. I talked about the games themselves. Game 7 was just a close battle all the way through. Congratulations to the Florida Panthers on winning their first Stanley Cup in existence. After 30 seasons, the Rats rain down on the ice and the Panthers are the Stanley Cup champions. And we got to talk about some former Ducks here. First off, congrats to Brandon Montour for lifting the cup. Congrats to Josh Mahura for lifting the cup, another longtime Duck. Also, how about Dmitry Kulikov? Did you notice that Kulikov was one of the first players to receive the cup? Yeah, because Kulikov has been around a while. We're talking a long while. Kulikov obviously has spent a lot of time in the NHL. He started off with the Florida Panthers and then just really went around the league. He went to Buffalo. He spent a couple of years in Winnipeg, was a New Jersey Devil, went to Edmonton, then went to the Minnesota Wild, went to the Anaheim Ducks, got traded away to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then signed this season back to where he started, the Florida Panthers. Can you believe that this is his 15th season in the National Hockey League? I didn't think he was that old, but he is. And for him playing in 948 career games, and by the way, he's played in 1,001 games between the between the NHL regular season and the postseason. And I think I heard that on the ESPN broadcast. Although by my countdown here, it's 999. But according to the broadcast, it was 1,001. Either way, we'll average it out. He's played 1,000 games, folks. 1,000 games. And he finally got to hoist Lord Stanley's Cup. So congrats to Kulikov on hoisting the cup. Anthony Stolarz, one of the nicest guys out there. He got to lift the cup. That was really cool to see Stoli the goalie lift the cup. Montour I mentioned, Mahura I mentioned. But now we got to talk about the other side of it. And you know where I'm going with this. I'm going to start with the Conn Smythe Trophy. The Conn Smythe Trophy did not go to a Florida Panther. It went to Connor McDavid of the Edmonton Oilers in a losing effort. Why is this important? Well, because Connor McDavid is the first player on a losing team to win the Conn Smythe Trophy since 2003. Jean-Sebastien Giguere of the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim won the Conn Smythe Trophy in a losing effort when the Mighty Ducks lost to the frickin' New Jersey Devils in 2003. I'm not bitter. I promise I'm still not bitter much. Okay, maybe it's still a little bit. That one still stings 21 years later. But whatever. Scott Stevens, whatever. But anyway, Jiggy deserved that Conn Smythe. He single-handedly sent the Ducks to the Stanley Cup final. He just put the team on his back, especially in that series against the Minnesota Wild in 2003, where he was just on God mode at that point. So that one was deserved. And by the way, Connor McDavid, only the second skater to win the Conn Smythe Trophy. The only other skater to win it, Reggie Leach of the Philadelphia Flyers back in 1976. And in fact, Connor McDavid joins this list. Roger Crozier, Glenn Hall, Reggie Leach, Ron Hextall, Jean-Sebastien Giguere, and now Connor McDavid as the 6 players to win the Conn Smythe in a losing effort since 1965. But Connor McDavid was just on one this entire postseason. 42 points this playoff, fourth most in a single postseason, behind only Wayne Gretzky's 47 and 43 and 85 and 88 respectively. And Mario Lemieux, 44 points in 1991. And now Connor McDavid is next on that list. So imagine those top three players on that list: Gretzky, Lemieux, McDavid. Yeah, that's an impressive list, folks. So I guess congrats of sorts to Connor McDavid on that one, joining the list with Giguere. And speaking of former Ducks, we got to talk about Corey Perry. I mean, I'm not going to talk about Adam Henrique, who was impressive this playoff. I'm not going to talk about Sam Carrick, who was impressive this playoff. But Corey Perry, I'm going to end with that. He just lost his fourth cup with his fourth different team in 5 years. The only player to ever do so. Imagine losing that many Stanley Cup finals in such a short amount of time. 2020, lost with the Dallas Stars. 2021, lost with the Montreal Canadiens. Then he was sick of the Lightning, so he joined the Lightning, only to lose in 2022, and then he lost again this year in 2024 in just utterly heartbreaking fashion. Part of the fans want to feel for Corey Perry, but the sting is lessened because he has at least won a cup. I mean, granted, it was all the way back in 2007, but at least Corey Perry has won a cup. I feel worse for guys like Adam Henrique, who has never won a cup, and he's now chasing a cup. He's not getting any younger, folks. He's going to want a cup sooner rather than later. Same with Sam Carrick. So just some passing thoughts on the Stanley Cup final. Gosh, poor Corey Perry. That broke a record. Yeah. Fourth loss with four different teams. That's an NHL record. No one else is going to do that. I don't think anyone else is going to think about doing that. I mean, who wants to lose the cup 4 times, much less with 4 different teams? I mean, there's plenty of players that have done it with 3 different teams, but 4, that's unheard of. Oh, by the way, speaking of Conn Smythe winners, so Connor McDavid did break a record this season. He got 34 assists this postseason in 24 games. 34 assists. That breaks Wayne Gretzky's record of 31 assists in 1988. McDavid had a performance for the ages, but it just wasn't enough, as the Florida Panthers are the Stanley Cup champions. All right, we're going to get out of here. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for listening. Don't forget this podcast is free and available across all platforms, including Stitcher, Spotify, Odyssey, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, etc. You can follow me on Twitter X at StimpyJD. The show's Twitter X is at LO_Ducks. I'll talk about AHL stuff next episode, and I'll talk more about draft stuff next episode because I will not be home for the draft. Yeah. Once again, thank you all for your continued support. It is so greatly appreciated. For Locked On Anaheim Ducks, I'm Jason JD Hernandez saying have a great rest of the day. Please remember to be safe out there, be kind to one another, and Ducks fly together.